if I understand your question, you're saying, what difference would it make to an atheist whether he exists or not? Well, firstly, David Hume said that a wise man should proportion his beliefs according to the available evidence. So if there's a tremendous amount of evidence for the existence of God, then we should believe it, right? Because we're rational human beings and we like to believe what is true. We don't like believing what's false, right? Imagine if I said to you, come and meet me at this place, and you get there and I say, well, actually, it wasn't that place. You'd say, well, why don't you tell me? Why don't you tell me the truth, right? And I say, well, why do you want to know the truth? Because you say, because it's true, and it's convenient as well. But the other more important reason, which I slightly mentioned at the beginning, was that without God, which is the theme of my tour this year, which is the purpose of life, without God, we lack any ultimate meaning and purpose. All that man is a being, is an accident that dies when he ends when he hits the grave. So that all that man is, all that the entire human race is like a criminal sentenced to death, and all he's doing is killing time before his sentence date. So all of the activities that you fill your life with is all for nothing. Your existence is for nothing. Your whole life, it does not matter whether you live or die. So in actual fact, if you committed suicide, which I'm not saying for anyone to do, if you're an atheist, by the way, yeah, don't get me wrong, it wouldn't make a difference. It has no difference. For you to live and for you to die, they're the same. You have to be indifferent. But why is it that we would say, no, that's wrong? That person should live. Why? Because we know deep down that that person has moral worth, that has meaning in his life. Yeah? But that can only be achieved if we believe in God. Do I pick? Oh, I have these two.
Oh, so you got some.
Objective subjects. Yeah. Can you give me a lift home? No, I'm just joking. Yeah. The problem of something coming from nothing is always going to be a problem with these theories. Because and it's pretty much what I said earlier about pushing the problem up one level. They want to make it as far as possible, but at the end of the day, we're dealing with a metaphysical question. And meta in Greek means above. So we're not dealing with the physical necessarily, we're dealing with something beyond that, right? It is a more deep, fundamental level. The fact is, how can you have something come from nothing? That is the conundrum, right? You cannot. Okay, let me explain this. Can physics? Does anyone study physics here? No. So that means I can make up whatever I want, and everyone will be nodding. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so physics can only explain one physical state to another physical state with a background of law, physical law. That's why we will never be able to have a scientific theory that can explain something coming from nothing, because physics only works when there is physicality to begin with. So, yes, and they can think of the M theory. I mean, there may well be a multiverse, but it will still need God to bring it into existence. You cannot escape the question. You would still need God, a transcendent cause, simply because matter and our existence is finite. Remember what I said in the beginning of the talk, that there's enough evidence for someone who is open-minded, and the second thing I said, open heart, right? Someone who is open to it, who doesn't have this psychological disposition, who does not want to believe in God. But in my experience, when I've encountered talking to atheists, it's not about philosophy, it's not about evidence, it's not about arguments, it's not about science, it's about psychology. And in most cases, people that are outspoken atheists, they're angry. They're angry about something that happened to them, right? Why did Like, for example, if you look at Freud and Darwin, they had an incident in their lives. I think Darwin lost his daughter when she was very, very young. These people go into a situation, and hopefully God will guide them again, and they will overcome their demons. But it's psychological. People they don't want to believe in a God. They don't want. And the main reason that atheism has grown is because they don't want. It's the father problem, right? They don't want someone else telling them how to live their lives. This is my personal experience. I could be wrong, but there are some genuine atheists out there who it is a problem of evidence, and the worst people are sometimes the people who believe in God to argue for God's existence. We just I spoke to someone and I told him about some of these arguments. He said, "Look, you don't have to believe in that. In someone in Bangladesh, for example, if he makes a dua, a prayer, and asks for a fish, and the fish comes out, that's enough for him, right? No, maybe for him, but not for everyone in the Western world who's slightly learned and who studied philosophy and argumentation. Imagine saying that to Stephen Hawking. It's not going to do very well with the M theory problem, right? But so we have to be, we have to do our bit as well. We have to argue in a reasonable way. These people, the Quran talks about these people all the time. It says they're deaf, dumb. So they're closed. Dumb as in not as in intellectually, but they're like what they're doing is they're going against their intuition. They're necessarily blinding themselves from the intuition, not because they lack of intelligence. But that's not a proof. You can't prove that. That's just a disposition that one could talk about. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Let me take a note because we're doing this in turns. We have to be fair. We're Muslim, right? So we have to be fair at least. Practice what we preach. Can you explain in more detail your objective and subjective section of your talk, please? I think you're referring to. Don't be shy. If you want to elaborate on the topic, that's fine. I think you're referring to the morality. Why is the moral aspect of it? What I'm saying is that the only way in which we can have objective morality. Okay, what is essential about morality? What is a key essential aspect of morality? You don't know? The key... Sorry, yes, brother. Is what? Yes. But what about... Yes, it doesn't change, but what about our usage of morality? What? No. No, we're not there yet. Getting there. He's ahead of us. Yes. Who said that? You. That we can have, I understand what you mean by that, but we can have the moral high ground. An aspect of morality only makes sense if we can point to someone and say, you are wrong. How can we say someone's wrong? There needs to be a standard, right? And that standard cannot be down to my opinion. It cannot be an illusion. It has to be a standard which I refer to and say that is wrong, because I point to something. What if someone says, 1 plus 1 is 4? Does he have the right to say that? Logically speaking, does he have the right? No, no, that's wrong, right? We can't say, we live in a free society and your opinion is as valid as my opinion. Imagine doing that in a maths class. It wouldn't go down very well, would it? You wouldn't do well in your exams. We say that a person is wrong because there's an objective standard of mathematics that we say to that person, because when you say to that person you are wrong, he says, how do you know I'm wrong? You say, here you are, mathematics, right? In the same way, in order for us to condemn someone, there needs to be objective morality, a standard which we can appeal to begin with. And then we talk about how do we get morality? Is it for revelation? Is it by reason? Is there a model? Etc., etc. I hope that answers that question. Okay, who is the Mahdi character that is to come come when Jesus comes? That's not really relevant to my talk. You know, I could talk about Stephen Hawking, but the Mahdi is some people dispute the topic whether Jesus and Mahdi are synonymous terms. These are eschatological statements, and they're just talking about the end of the days. And just go on to Google, and hopefully you're going to find out more, because we don't have much time, and I wanted to answer the questions. Any more questions? Yes, it is absolutely simple, right? But the reason that it becomes complicated because people who don't want to believe in God start bringing more complicated objections. So then you have to rise to the level, you raise the level of discourse, and then they raise it, and then you raise it. Before you know, you don't even understand what anyone's talking about, right? But it's the essential. All of these arguments are so intuitive. Like, that's why I gave the example of the translucent pink ball. Yeah. What is the first question that you're going to ask? What's it doing there, right? So you go to a park. Let me just build on that one slightly more. So you go to this park that you've been going for the last 10 years, and suddenly you find this big, ginormous pink ball. And what's the first question? Everyone agrees. What's it doing there? But guess what? What is true of the pink ball is the grass that you observed for 10 years. It is true of the trees that you observed. It is true of the pavement. It is true about the entire park. Why don't you ask that question about what's it doing there? Do you see? That we forget to ask that question because we become immune to our surroundings. But it's the same question, it's the same problem, it's the same environment. It's exactly the same thing. The question that is applied to the ball applies to yourself and everything around you. So you're right. It's a very simple argument.
My follow-up question was on that basis, Islam belief, basically something that anyone can comprehend.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One famous philosopher, a wise man, said, in order to know yourself, you have to know God. You cannot know yourself. Right? It's very simple. You cannot know yourself if you do not know God. Yes. Right. That's a... Yeah. Okay. So there's a sort of assumption behind this that if something is not necessarily perfect, if they have an all-powerful, all-knowing God, then why, for example, why are we not perfect beings, right? But that does not logically follow, because we cannot undermine design by the very fact that there are discrepancies in a design, right? For example, what is the nicest car out there? Come on, you guys are young. A what? A Micra. A Micra. No, let's say BMW 7 Series. You see, I know a little bit about cars. Yeah? There you are, right? And that's a very well-designed car. But then if we look at something like, 60, 70 years ago with Skoda, right? Although Skodas are great cars now, the world's gone upside down, you know. But the design of those cars, some of them were considered to be the worst cars designed in all time, right? But do they ever deny the fact that it was designed? Just because something is not designed to, let's say, optimal level, right? It doesn't mean it's not designed. Now the question about, well, why is the universe so big? Why did it take so long? That has no bearing. That has no bearing on the fact of is something designed or not. The significance of how big something is, or how complicated something is, or the time that it took, has no bearing, logically speaking, on if it was designed or not. Do you see what I mean? What they're doing, they're jumping. Because what they have is some assumed ideas to begin with, for them to have sort of be skeptical about that. Yeah. Well, okay. Efficiency is only a concern for a being that has limited resources and limited amount of time. But for a being like God, that's not an issue. Right? He has an infinite amount of time, he creates resources. Right? So that's not an issue for him. That's only a concern for a being that has a limited amount efficiency, a limited amount of time, and a limited amount of resources. So that objection does not apply. You're absolutely right. It doesn't apply to God. Yes, and God created time. God is not subject to time. He's not thinking. God is not going, oh man, I've got this deadline, got to create Adam and Eve, and I'm just running out of resources. He's not doing that. He doesn't have that issue. We have that issue. Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that the complexity of the world are signs for us to know Him. How do we know that Allah's plan, God's plan, was to make it so complicated, to make the universe so big, for us to look out there and say, there's something special about me. Right? How do we know they're not signs? We could just say that they're intentionally made in this way to present to us as being signs for us to ponder. Any more questions? I'm running out of time. I know, but we have to let someone else have a go. We'll come back to you if there's no more. You've been holding your hand up for a long time. Yeah.
Some people obviously keep going back and you follow the chain. Or this created this actually created this.
Who created God?
Who created God? I don't know.
Okay.
You kind of covered it, but I don't know.
Okay. So a wise guy who says, okay, fine, he can't go on forever. Okay, but then who created God? This person thinks they're really smart, by the way, but they're not, all right? Because the question doesn't make sense. It's like saying, what caused an uncaused cause? Yeah? What caused an uncaused cause? The reason that we postulate a necessary being, remember that doesn't apply because we're talking about a necessary being. We're not talking about a contingent being to bring the universe. Because if it was a contingent being, then that would be right. That question would be legitimate, right? Remember what I said, that because the universe began to exist, that we question what caused it. Right? Oh, for you. So began to exist, that's why it's caused it. That's why we ask the question. So that question doesn't make sense. Yeah? It's a childlike question. But why? That's that sort of thing. Because it doesn't logically make sense. Oh, we've got some more questions. Wow. If your purpose is to God and serve Him, then your purpose behind this. So if your purpose is here on earth is to serve God and serve Him, then what is the purpose behind this? Well, that wouldn't make sense because that is the necessary purpose. That is the objective purpose. That is the purpose. So again, you're asking the question: what is the cause of an uncaused cause? It doesn't make sense. That is the purpose. It's grounded in the necessary being, which is God, which is given that purpose to us. So that doesn't make sense, right? Why is it so hard for us human beings to accept nothingness? Why can't we just be without the invention of a higher energy? But that's not nothingness. To believe in a higher energy is not nothingness, right? That is something. What the question is absolutely nothing, literally nothing. What I mean is absence of anything. Absence of anything. That is what I mean by nothing. I don't mean no structure. I don't mean just a world of energy, particles just forming. I mean absolutely nothing, and we can't comprehend that. That suddenly everything that we have in the universe comes from nothing. Because how does that work? Remember, if you say nothing, it doesn't even have the potentiality to come into existence. It couldn't even have the potentialness about it to even bring about something into existence. Next. I found your talk quite confusing. I was wondering if you could explain the proof of God in the most simplest form. Right, something can't come from nothing. We come from, we're here, we're something, then something brought us into existence. That's done. Considering arguments in favour of God's existence, such as Paley's teleology arguments, William Paley's, yeah, and those in which you've mentioned, do still reject the atheism exists? Yes, people do believe in atheism, even with all the arguments in the world. Like I said, it's psychological, not philosophical. Not a question, more like a personal revelation. Wow. Due to evolution, man is gifted with large critical and multilateral thinking. Wow, there's an essay here. Well, it's double-paged. Right. Okay, possibly judge determined by the man involved in this. Something about evolution here. I do believe in God, but God is man, or better to say man is his own God. Might not make sense, or yeah. Well, yeah, kind of like a romantic sort of picture. We are God. God is man. I don't think so, because I didn't cause the universe to come into existence, because I didn't exist. So, if you want to associate with that, fair enough. But it just wouldn't make sense. Any more questions? There's one more. Yeah. Can we ask another question? No. Is it possible for you to ask Allah gave you a sign to prove that He exists, like He did with the prophets? Is it possible if you may have a personal experience, right? Because the arguments that I spoke about today are objective arguments which we can all observe and discuss. But you might have a personal experience in your life, and it would be perfectly warranted, perfectly rational to accept it until otherwise. For example, people have personal experiences. Any more questions? You're saying that how does God know when that person's going to die? Decided for him to die. Okay. Okay, I've got it. So then if he has cancer, then he overcomes cancer, then God didn't decide for him to die. But how do you know that God didn't know that he was going to have cancer and live after that, and he's going to die later on? How do you know that? There you are there. Next question. Oh, God. On a serious note, yeah, there are many different ways to formulate arguments, but to appeal to the Quran necessarily presupposes, to a certain extent, that the Quran is divine to begin with, but then that becomes a circular argument. So that's why I give arguments that are philosophical rather than theological in nature, in history. That's why I tend to give, so that everybody can appreciate them without already being Muslim. Because if we're going to refer to Ibrahim alayhi salam as a prophet, and the prophet, peace be upon him, then we're already Muslim and then we already believe in God. So that's maybe some of the reasons that I give. So in order to allow people to, let's say, put aside the theological prejudice, if you like. So give a more sort of open example. Absolutely, yeah. This very good point, brother. This idea that we somehow just are Muslim because our parents are Muslim is completely antithetical to the teaching of the Quran. The Quran, over and over again, teases and agitates our minds. It talks about evidence. Do you not use your reason? Where is your evidence? If you speak the truth, bring forth your evidence. Over and over again. So as Muslims, we need to do some homework, and we need to go out there, especially for the fact that we do not live in a theological setting. We live in a very secular, post-Christian society. So it is ever more important to read up on this stuff, and go beyond some of the things that we read, and that we read as a hobby, but read out then, go read it and be well versed with these arguments. Look, one day you're going to be parents and you're going to have children, and your children are going to come to you and they're going to ask you, do you have, they're going to say, Dad, my teacher said, if God exists, then why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? And you're going to say, shush, go to your room. No, you're not going to say that. You're going to give a cogent example. You're going to give an argument to rebut that. It happens. These things are going to happen to the next generation. So my time's up. Thank you all for being patient and turning up today. Hopefully it was enjoyable and did justice to the talk, inshallah. Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.